a little bit about the process of the budget process each year. I haven't usually gone into that during my time here, but this year I thought I would a little bit. Generally, Lynn Melograno and I get together early on, and then a first draft budget is created. And that's based on all the feedback we've had over time during the year of the needs for the next year, from the bishop, from other standing committee members, from any other sources in the diocese. Then the finance committee takes that first draft and reworks it in certain ways as they see fit. And then when they're happy with it, it gets sent to the standing committee for their final approval. And their approval is to send it to you for today's vote. So that's the entire process. But there is wide participation before it even gets here. So I wanted to make that clear. If you'll pull out in your packet, you have a spreadsheet that contains the budget. Let me start with something that I want to thank all of you and your churches for. If you'll look for a moment at the first line, the church's giving line, line 2, you'll see that in October of this year, through October of this year, the churches have already given 101% of the whole year's budgeted amount. Amen. So you have been, as usual, or more than usual, generous to the diocese. And that's, we are blessed. The diocese as a whole is blessed by that generosity. And that's, it's not new. The churches have been incredibly generous all around, but never have I seen a time when through October we had already met the whole year's budget, which means it'll be even bigger than that by the end of the year. And so because of that generous giving, even though giving by individuals is off a little bit from what was budgeted in last year, through October, there's a surplus of $154,000. And that's amazing, too. We've never seen anything like that in October. But it's not going to probably stay quite that large. The Great Commission Committee, through October, had only spent 56% of their total budget. In November, they spent the rest. Okay, so that's like $65,000 or $70,000 that will show up as expenses in November. Well, with that kind of hit, and with the cost of this Synod, which also only occurs in 1 month out of the year, November, we'll probably have a paper deficit in November. But December should be typical of the rest of the year. And so I expect that we will have a nice, tidy surplus at the end of the year, again, thanks to the generosity of the churches. Now, how did we get the proposed budget line for this year, $1,483,245? Well, mechanically, the way we got that number is we took the sum of all of your operating income projections in your congregational reports for this year, for 2023. We took that number, added all the churches together, and then increased it by 4%. Given how much your giving this year has gone ahead of budget, we assume that's probably happening because your incomes, the giving by your congregations to your churches, are driving that increase. And so we assume that now that COVID is fully behind us, that'll continue some. So we increased the sum of all of your 2023 operating income projections by 4%. And then we took 5.1% of that, which is the ask for this year, that sum from all the churches, and it yields that proposed budget line there of $1.483 million. Then we lowered, though, the expected or budgeted income from individual contributions this year for 24 compared to the previous year. And why? Because it's running way low this year. You see, the budget amount was $70,000. Through October, it's just about $39,000. And so while it might go up a little bit more in November and December, we don't expect it to get near $70,000. So why was it so high for 2023 last year? Well, because in 2022, they gave $80,000. I don't know what happened in 2022 to have the individuals give that much. So we said, okay, well, that's a lot. So we'll only do 70 in 2023. And then that turned out to be way too high in terms of what's realistically happening. So we're going back to kind of normal per year, if you will, in the proposed budget for 2024 in terms of contributions from individuals. And then, so you add that up, and it gets to the total operating income line, line 8, of $1,523,245. Now, you notice that doesn't include any ACNA income. That ACNA income used to come to the diocese because our previous bishop was and is the dean of provincial affairs in ACNA. And so ACNA would give our church, our diocese, some money to help cover his salary. Well, when Chris came on board a couple of months into the year, he's not the dean of provincial affairs, so we don't get that anymore. So that's why it disappears, as that line item does in 2024. Okay. If starting to look at expenses, let's look first at the Great Commission Committee. It's been $150,000 every year of the diocese. It has never changed. No matter what the inflation rate has been or anything else, it's been $150,000 a year until this year. We're proposing $250,000. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, there's been inflation in the cost of everything over the years, and we've never adjusted the GCC budget to account for that in the past. And secondly, we had another source of funding for church planning at the diocesan level called the Vision of 50 Fund, where we planned over 10 years to plant 50 churches, and people contributed to that fund. And it used to have a couple of $100,000 in it. Well, over the years, that fund has been depleted. In fact, it has a small negative balance today. So the actual spending on church planning and church support by the diocese has been more than the 150 or the proposed 250 today in past years, if you think about the Vision for 50 funds as part of it. But that's not part of the budget. That was a separate fund altogether, but it was for church planning, and our Great Commission Committee oversaw the use of that money as well. And so, but that no longer exists. Unless a bunch of you want to step up and pay a lot into the Vision for 50 fund, you're welcome to do that. So it's a little bit misleading that 150,000 that it's always been, because we had the Vision for 52 involved for a number of recent years, but no longer. That's been exhausted. So we felt that there should be at least $100,000 increase in that to make up for that, to just kind of stay where we've been, not with an actual real increase in what's being spent between the two sources of funds. Now, moving on, I'm not going to go line by line, but only the more significant changes. The next one would probably be the travel expense is going up by $3,000. That's because we have a new traveler, our new canon for the ordinary, and so we want to budget some travel money for him. Otherwise, it would be the same as last year. Then, for the moment, I'm going to skip the new initiatives, if you will, and just look at the other things. The cash compensation you would think would be higher than just $24,000 with another canon added to the staff. But we also, though, had a departure from the staff. Heather Adams, our long-term registrar, retired from that position. Now she's, I think, on the Constitution and Canons Committee or something, but she's not retired from her job of the diocese as the registrar. And so the new canon and others on the staff will have to pick up all the things the registrar did, but we're not going to hire another registrar. So most of the compensation for the new canon we've already gotten because we've saved paying a registrar. So there's an offset there. And so that means because we did a 3% COLA, cost of living adjustment for all of our staff from last year to this year in the budget. And so 3% alone would be practically the change you have there without the new canon. But his cash compensation and housing allowance are largely offset by not having a salary for the registrar. So that's why that change is so small this year. The big increase is in health care, and there's two reasons for that big increase. One, as all of you have probably experienced in wherever you're getting your health care, it just keeps going through the roof from year to year and how much it costs. Our premiums are expected to increase 10% this year. In addition to that, we have two more people participating in the group that our health care plan covers. And so with more people to cover and with the 10% increase in premiums, it is gone up. And as you see, even through October of last year, where is it again? I lost it. October of last year, it went up to, was it 49,000 already? And so by the end of the year, it'll be over 50. So it's much higher than what we'd budgeted for last year anyway. But then in addition to that, we're assuming on top of that last year's increase, there'll be another 10% this year.
And Bishop John was on pension fund health insurance, right? So that also.
Yeah.
So that was.
Right. But
made it less last year than this year.
yes, it would have. But anyway, he's gone off that fund, but he's still in our hearts. So, okay.
John was not needing health insurance, expensive health insurance because it was covered by the pension fund. He was old enough to be covered by
Social Security.
Church pension funds, health, Medicare.
Yeah. Right.
Can you repeat what she said?
For what?
Bishop John
was covered by Medicare supplement plan provided by the Episcopal Church pension fund for all those years he served.
the last couple of years.
So the diocese, our diocese wasn't paying his health care.
Well, they paid it,
Not all
but
of it.
not
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's sort of the bigger changes in the budget from last year. Most of the items are a little more, a little less than what was budgeted last year. And so when you go to the bottom line, you'll see total expenses equaling the revenue, the same $1,523,246. So that means we're expecting a balanced budget at the end of the year of that amount. Another thing that we have to think about is, well, if the revenue isn't as much or the expenses turn out to be more than we budgeted and we wind up with a deficit, in the past, when that has happened, we would make up the deficit by pulling down our reserves in the amount of the deficit. Well, our reserves as an organization, as a diocese, peaked at around $500,000 several years, maybe 5 years ago. And how would it grow? Well, if we ran surpluses in a given year and they weren't used, the surplus wasn't used for anything else, it would automatically be put into reserves. So the reserves had built up over the time of the diocese creation, and maybe even before. Probably some surplus might have been transferred to the diocese from the old Anglican District of Virginia, the predecessor to the diocese. But we had up $500,000. Well, for the last several years, we have run deficits, and now our reserves are under 300,000. I think they're about 280 something. I don't have it with me right now. And that's not even 3 months of operating expenses. And most accounting and economists say the rule of thumb is your reserve should be at least 3 months of expenses. But we're a little under that now for the first time ever. So if we run a surplus this year, as we expect, I would hope that some of the funds from that surplus would be placed in to restore some of the reserves, especially since with the increased size of this budget from last year, a 1 month expenditure is bigger than it was for this year. So we're even more or less, we may only be at about 2 or 2.3 months of reserves, but judging by next year's expenses per month. And so, that's what I would hope. But there might, and if it's really large, like the 154,000 is, you don't have to put that much in reserves. The standing committee would have to determine what to do with it. That wouldn't be my call, because that goes into what are we doing with our resources, and that's not my job. I'm the treasurer. The standing committee makes policy. So okay. So I'm going to call Amy Rowe up to join me, if she would. Amy is the chairman of the Finance Committee, and so she has had more of a role than other standing committee members, other than the other members of the committee, to put this budget together. And so I don't know what all your questions might be, but if I can't answer them, maybe she can. So we'll try, okay? Any questions about the budget? Yes.
Thank you, Gary. We appreciate your work on this and all that you've done. And I just have a few things I'm trying to understand, and if you could help me with that. You've been helpful already. I've asked you a few questions, and you've answered those. One thing you mentioned is the revenue, the income that comes in from the churches. And, last year we had a budget that was presented, and at that time we just had actuals through the end of September. And those actuals ended up being 150% higher at the end of the calendar year last year. So this year we're at giving through October, and we're at 1,047,000, or 101% of budget, just like you said. So what we see at the Falls Church is that in November and December, our giving is 26 or 27% of the total year. So based on that, to project to the end of the year, that could be a 1.33 factor. So if you used that type of projection on income, and I know you said you use sort of what you think the churches have told you their income would be, we're looking at a number that would be $1,393,000. So significantly higher. But again, last year when we were at September and then looked to December, we had an adjustment or a factor of 1.5 to take that to the end of the year. So there's a big bump in the last couple of years, last couple of months of the year. Does that make sense?
Bump and given by the churches to the diocese?
It's not a bump in giving, it's the fact that October, November, December, we have such an increase in revenue on a monthly basis compared to the other months in the year that it's not just, an 8% month. It's a 12 or more % month.
Well, typically, especially in December, it goes up.
Right.
And because some churches have made an adjustment in what they give because they brought in more than they thought. And so that happens sometimes, and it may well happen this year. I just explained, though, that I don't think there will be, even if there's a bump in revenue in November, it's not likely to cover the extra expenses that we'll have that we don't have in other months in November.
If you had a 1.33 adjustment for the end of the year, and you had 100% of your expenses actually incurred by the end of the year, based on your budget, those expenses are, let's see, what are they, 1,152,000?
The expenses are 1,573.
So you would have actually more income, and it would generate that surplus that you're talking about. So right now we're at $150,000 surplus, but and even when you're at 100% spend on your expenses, you're still going to have a sizable surplus. I mean, we could be talking about several $100,000.
Well, if we don't, unless the bump in income is really large, I don't see how it could be that
Well,
big.
that's what I'm saying. The bump is going to be 1.33.
Why do you think that?
Well, last year it was 1.5. So if you look at last year's budget,
I don't have it in front of me.
I happen to have it. And
Great.
the giving as of the end of September was 718,426, 429, I think. The actual income from the churches last year was 1,075,488. Okay.
Yeah.
So you have to factor it 1.5 times that September number. Right now, we're sitting at this number in end of October. Our actual giving is 1,047,000.
Yes.
And what I'm saying is for the Falls Church, for November and December, those months make up about 26 or 27% of our income. So if you figured at end of October you had $75,000, at the end of the year we'd have $100,000. Okay, it's
Well, are you saying the Falls Church's income is bumping up in those 2 months, and therefore the diocese contribution is bumping up?
Yeah.
Okay, so you computed each month separately rather than just for the year and then dividing it by 12?
That's right. If you divide it by 12, you're at, what, 8.3 or something per month, 8.3%.
Okay.
And so what we're looking at is a number here in October that's going to be significantly lower than what you're going to see at the end of the year.
Well, of course, it always is.
Yeah.
But I don't know how much different it'll be compared to other years. But I know that November's expenses are going to be much greater than any other month of the year.
Right.
And so I don't know if it'll bump up enough to have a surplus in November, but it may well have a pretty good surplus in December.
Yeah.
So I would think we will have a surplus at the end of the year.
Right.
And after some reserve replacement, I don't know how much that leaves over. Or what you're saying, a couple 100,000, we'll see if that really happens.
Right, so I mean, if you took all the 100% of the budget for expenses, it's 1,152,000. And if the income comes in at 30%, 33% more, you're going to generate about a $300,000 surplus. You okay?
Budgeted expenses are 1.5 million. So how are you getting, so you think the revenue may increase by 300,000 or 400,000 in the last 2 months? Is that what you're saying?
Well, let's see, the budgeted for 2023 is 1,152,000 for operating expenses, 1,152,000.
That's for last year. For this year, it's 1.5 million.
Yeah.
For next year, right?
No, I'm talking about this year,
Okay.
23. The 23 budget,
Point of order, I'm sorry. Are we not trying to discuss the 2024 budget?
yeah, but it
Yeah.
ties in.
Right, but that's just for a surplus that's going to end up, that they'll account for later. I think we probably want to move on to what we're trying to do at this meeting. Let's just check.
Okay, but then for 24, if you have a surplus, then in the 24 budget, you built in the recovery of the loss in net operating income. So for 23, there's a loss in net operating income of about $45,000 or $46,000. That's built into the 24 budget.
No, but we're not going to use the reserves for that.
This isn't the reserves.
I'm sorry. What are you saying? Is it
Yeah,
a loss?
so, Gary, what I'm saying is, in the 24 budget, you have this $46,000 shortfall
Yes.
in the 23 budget that's shown over at the bottom below your operating
Yeah, it's
expenses.
1.15.
But that's included in the,
It's 1.15, and then there's a net income, a net deficit of 45,800. And that's why that's because we budgeted reserves to cover that. But because we're running a surplus in 2023, we're not going to need those reserves, that 45,000 or 46,000 of reserves that we budgeted last year. Where the churches are being so generous in their giving this year that we're going to run a surplus, not a deficit. So
Right.
we won't need it.
but that's not how the 24 budget was developed. The 24 budget was developed without that surplus. Right?
Right,
Amy
yeah.
says right. So it was actually developed based on the negative net income of 46,000. So I'm saying that's embedded in the 24 number. Okay.
Okay, go ahead. You have- Step over. We can stop.
Hello, I'm Tom Yates with the Falls Church as well. I wanted to make a couple comments and then maybe ask a question. Well, I'm thankful for this diocese. The last diocesan meeting I went to was in 2006. It was the Diocese of Virginia. Different environment. I'm very thankful to be here. I'm thankful for the work that you've done. The concern that we have is the increase from 4.1% to 5.1% in the ask. That's a 24% increase. I think our concerns, and some of this may be historical, I don't think it's woundedness, but historically, we had disputes with the Episcopal Church over our giving. We're concerned about subsidiarity, the keeping things at the local church as much as possible. I feel like the trajectory of this is moving against that. The TFCA vestry is committed to this diocese and committed substantial resources to priorities such as the Great Commission. For instance, this year we've given $75,000 to church plants, and we intend to do that directly in conjunction with the diocese. And we're restarting our Timothy program. So I guess my question, Gary, is could you comment on the increase from 4.1 to 5.1? And I'd be interested in that. Thank you.
Yeah. You want to answer it? I'm transferring the hot seat.
I mean, I can speak more generally to the concept of subsidiarity, which is important to all of us. It's always been part of the culture of this diocese. But subsidiarity is letting the local church do what the local church does best, and the diocese not getting overly involved in that, not being authoritative in that, not controlling, the vision, strategy, planning at the parish level. And then, as you move on up the province, not doing that at the diocese level. And I think a 1% increase, even though it's a 24% increase over the 4.1, it's still, the 4.1 is only 41% of the expected ask of a diocese or of a parish to the diocese. And so it's a pretty small increase and still puts our diocese at one of, if not the lowest asks in the province. And it doesn't represent the diocese getting involved in a heavy-handed way in the actual implementation of the vision of the diocese at the local level, church planting and the ministry of the local church. It's just about the way we share resources so that we can empower churches to do our shared mission. And I think the Falls Church has just been, a church planting behemoth, and that's amazing, and we're really grateful for that. But that's the work of one resource church, and having that happen at a diocesan level lets the mission and ministry of church planting be something that all churches can participate in, and this at a relatively small increase. But I don't know if you have anything you want to add to that.
No, you're better than me at that. I think another way to look at it, back to the budget, what I'm good at is you got to look at each of the line items and the expenses that we're doing it, and you sort of say, is that worthwhile? Is that something the diocese should be doing? I think I made the point earlier that in actual dollars available for church planning at the diocesan level, it's really no different in this budget than it has been in other years. It's just that we had a second source, the Vision for 50 fund, that we no longer have, unless it gets replenished. And so that increase, that's $100,000 of more for that purpose in the budget than we've had in the past, but it's not a greater amount of resources for church planning at the diocese level. Now but all the other items, unless you think they shouldn't be as large as they are in the proposed budget, then I don't quite know why you would be so concerned with the 5.1%, because that's what you get when you add up all those expenses of all the line items. But you can challenge, you can say the diocese should in general do less, I guess, in terms of finances.
Okay. I think we have another question. Did you want to say something? Okay.
Oh, that's great. Thank you. And thank you. If churches want to give not just to the general fund of the diocese, but also want to give to the work of church planting, what is the fund that they now give to since the Vision for 50 is going away? Do we make our check out to the GCC Church Planting Fund, GCC? Which is the fund that we should give to for...
You want to designate your money?
On top of the, so if we give our
Go ahead.
percentage to the general fund of the diocese, then we want to give a further percentage,
Oh, further.
right? So this is actually, so like this was actually baked into our MOU
Right.
for, as a church plant, and we've kept it going because it's actually a joy to teach our church when we can't afford a church planter, that this is what we do. Where do we give that money to on top of the general fund?
Well, the check would be made out still to the diocese.
Yeah, I'm not sure who you put in the memo line. You can ask Lynn, but the Vision
Okay.
for 50 fund still exists, and
Got it.
that's still the additional designated church planting fund. It's just out of money right
Okay.
now. So, and I think Morgan's question points out something that's important, which is that our church plants, as part of their MOU with the diocese, they give an additional, I believe it's 5% on top of their diocesan general fund gift toward the work of church planting. So they're all giving like 9-10% right out
Yep.
of the gate. Yeah.
That's right. Thank you.
I want to just make the point that we have gone over our time, which I'm okay with because we need to hear this, but we're getting dangerously close. We will miss break, and we do have breakout sessions at 2:30. So I'm wondering, one more, and then we'll move to voting on the budget.
I'll be brief. My name is George Ward from the Falls Church Anglican. I'm referring to lines 29, 30, and 31 in the budget, which are new initiatives, diocesan response team, next generation leadership development, church revitalization initiative. And this is really for the finance committee. In looking at these initiatives, I'm sure you projected to the future as to if this is seed money, what are your projections for the cost of these initiatives moving into the next 5 years?
We don't have those.
I haven't made such a projection yet, but we know one of them, at least, the first one, that's for the response team. We anticipate $10,000 a year for the next 5 years after 2024. So we have a total fund of $65,000 as a designated fund in case there's costs related to alleged abuse of any people in our diocese. But that's the only one where we think we know what the future numbers are. We have not made forecasts for the others at this point. First of all, we're not sure what it will be this year, but we will know at this time next year, and then we'll have a better feel for what it'll cost in coming years after that.
At this time, I think we need to go ahead and move towards voting on the budget. Would someone like to move that we vote on the budget as presented? Second? All in favor of adopting the budget as presented signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Nay. Oh, say no if you, or nay. Okay. I think the ayes carry. So moved.
Am I excused?
Yes, thank you, Gary, and thank you, Amy. I'm going to call up Greg Strong at this time, and Greg's going to do a lightning report for us on from the Constitution and Canons Committee. Greg has been the co-chair of that committee, and they have done a great job, as they always do, very thorough and very detailed. Thanks, Greg. Come on up.
Good afternoon. I had been planning to read the Constitution and Canons from the beginning to end, but we'll have to forgo that pleasure. So I hope you all have had a chance to look at the report. So there's a report, and then there are three proposals for amendments that we're recommending. I will not read them. I'll try to summarize both the report and the proposals, and then we'll move to voting. But I just encourage you to vote aye. But I will read the first part because I think the first paragraph is important. The Constitution and canons of the Diocese of the Mid-Atlantic both express and shape the way we seek to live well together as Anglican members of the body of Christ locally gathered. So the Constitution and Canons Committee serves the diocese by reviewing the Constitution and canons and recommending, when needed, amendments to them. Integral to the work of the committee is ensuring that the diocesan constitution and canons conform to the provincial constitution and canons, and that will come into play later in particular. So the members of the committee are listed there, and I apologize, I was going to read all the names. If they're here and they want to stand at this moment, great. We put in a lot of work during the course of the year, and they deserve to be recognized for their work on the Constitution and canons. It's a joint effort by a number of people. So Scott Buckout and James Coltharp, Alex Elmore, Susan Furtick-Dykes, Mike Harpster, Paul Julian, Trevor McFadden, Becky Newman, who's not here, Andy Orovitz, and David Shaw. And Scott Ward, of course, provides an invaluable resource as an ex officio member, since he's Chancellor of the Diocese as well as Chancellor of the province. So during the course of the year, we got requests from several sources to look at various matters that are in the Constitution and canons. We met as a whole committee 7 times during the year, but we also divided it into 2 subcommittees because that allowed us to do a lot more of the work between the full committee meetings. So most of the work that we did was between the full committee meetings. We would then meet as a full committee, discuss what the subcommittees were reporting, and then towards the end of our time, we began to deliberate as a full committee on everything that we were looking at. From all of that, we came up with 3 proposals to amend the Constitution and canons. And we'll get to those in a second. They have to do with the requirement of churches to have insurance to protect against financial misconduct. They have to do with the appointment of a canonical investigator in case of alleged clergy misconduct. And they have to do with a standard for recusal, if warranted, of members of the ecclesiastical trial court. So that's a quick summary of who we are, what we did, and how we went about our work during the course of the year. So with that, we move to actual proposals. So we're looking at proposal number 1. And I hope you've had a chance to read this. I will try to summarize it, and if there are any questions about it, then I'll try to answer the questions. So the first one is a proposed amendment to Title 1B.1.3.E, which everybody just knows by memory. So Title 1B has to do with the organization and administration of congregations and missions. This particular canon specifies that congregations have to have a treasurer, and then it provides some guidance about both what the treasurer does, but also what churches need to have to, again, guard against financial misconduct. So basically, it reads, the current text of this canon reads, as you see it there, each congregation shall have a treasurer elected by the vestry, who shall be a member of the finance committee ex officio and be bonded in such sum and with such surety as the vestry from time to time shall determine. I'll stop there because we're not going to change anything. We're not proposing any changes except in the language that shows through strikeout there. We got a comment from a treasurer in one of the congregations that they couldn't get insurance from their insurance company that was a surety bond. So they were trying to comply with the canon. They went back to the company, and the company said, we can provide financial misconduct insurance, but it would be in the form of what we will point out later. So we looked at that and said, fine, the intent is to prevent financial misconduct and to guard congregations against that. If we could change the language and still uphold that principle, that would work. So we came up with this as an amendment. And again, what's in the proposed text that we're showing in the middle of the page, what's in black remains the same. Only what's read changes, and it changes only what's been struck out in the current text. So the important part is what we're replacing, and that's each congregation shall have insurance covering ministry personnel dishonesty and/or insurance covering theft of money and securities in such amount. All of the rest of the text is the same as it was in the current Constitution before any proposal for amendment. The church that sent us the question has that kind of insurance. At least one other church in the diocese has that kind of insurance. I suspect that most of your churches have that kind of insurance. So we thought the language there would both honor the intent of the original canon, the way it was written, but would change it just enough that it wasn't raising a standard that couldn't be met by congregations when they went to their insurance companies. So our proposal is to strike the language that's in the current text that is shown in strikeout and add the language that's in red, and that would be our proposal.
Do we have any? We're moving there. Are there any questions first? I now would ask the Synod to vote on this amendment by acclamation. All in favor of approving as this committee has suggested, signify with aye. Aye. Any opposed? So moved.
All right, thank you. So we move on to the second proposed amendment, and this is the next two proposals have to do with Title IV. Title IV has to do with ecclesiastical discipline in the canons. This particular canon, Canon 3 in Title IV, gives guidance about the canonical investigator. So actually, Bishop Guernsey, before he retired from oversight of the diocese, asked us to look at this title, this very one, and review it. And so after a lot of deliberation, we're going to make the proposal that we have here. It's pretty simple, actually. The current text of Canon Title 4.3 reads, "The Standing Committee of the Diocese shall appoint a canonical investigator to ascertain the merit of any accusations made against any clergy of the diocese, and to make a recommendation to the Standing Committee as to whether further juridical process should be pursued." We're going to recommend that we strike all that language and replace it with the language that's in red, which is a canonical investigation shall take place in accordance with Title IV of the provincial canons. The reason for that is there are two or three reasons, and if there are any questions, we can certainly try to answer those as best we can. One is the diocesan canons have to be in conformity with the provincial canons. We can have things in the diocesan canons that go further than the provincial canons if they don't contradict anything in the provincial canons. But in every other respect, we have to be in conformity with the provincial canons. The provincial canon Title 4.3, the relevant one, is listed in the middle there where it says relevant ACNA canon. The important thing to note is that begins, if the bishop deems the accusers or the accusations to be credible, he shall cause an investigation to be made by a canonical investigator. The diocesan canon is clearly in conflict with that because the diocesan canon indicates that the standing committee will cause the investigation to be made. And the provincial canon clearly states that the bishop will cause the investigation to be made. It's not that the bishop will be the investigator or the standing committee will be the investigator, but the person who begins is the ecclesiastical authority in a diocese, and that is the bishop, not the standing committee. So by definition, the diocesan canon is in conflict with the provincial canon, and we cannot be in conflict with the provincial canon. So it has to be amended in that respect. That was through long deliberation. It really didn't take that long, but we figured it out pretty quickly.
Do we have any questions about that?
The next part of it to say, in case anybody's wondering, is what we're proposing is the canonical investigation shall take place in accordance with Title IV of the provincial canons. So remember, we have to be in conformity with the provincial canons. The provincial canons on ecclesiastical discipline are in flux. Because of things that are going on at the provincial level, they are undergoing thorough review. And what they are now, they will almost certainly not be at some future point. So rather than amend this canon in such a way now that we are in conformity with the way the provincial canons are now, but then find out later because of changes at the provincial level, we would need to revise it again. We took a conservative approach and simply said, what we'll do is refer to Title IV in the provincial canons and say we follow that. And that means we're in conformity today. We will be in conformity tomorrow. We will be in conformity until the provincial canons have undergone a thorough review and find their final state, in which case then we would go back and look at the diocesan canons and say, do we need to make any adjustments? So that's why this does not add anything. It strikes the current text as it is and simply says we refer to the provincial canons for this question of causing a canonical investigation. So that's the rationale for all that.
Thank you, Greg. Do we have any questions? I would just ask the Synod to vote on the amendment. All in favor of the adoption of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved.
Thank
It
you.
carries.
So proposed amendment 3, which is also to Title IV, and this is a different canon in Title IV. It's Canon 4, Section 4. So Canon 4 has a few sections. This is Section 4. Has to do with the quorum and composition of court. And the current text reads as it does there, and I won't bother reading the whole current text. I'm sure you've done that on your own. So that's what the canon Title 4.4.4 now reads, if you just see current text. What we, looking at that, and again, this is because of what's going on at the provincial level. There is no standard for recusal for the ecclesiastical trial court. In other words, every diocese has to establish an ecclesiastical trial court according to provincial canons. So we have an ecclesiastical trial court. The quorum and composition of court canon specifies some information there, but there's no standard of recusal. So if there's some kind of conflict between a member of the ecclesiastical trial court and the parties that are involved that come in the investigation and in the trial, then there's no way by canon to adjudicate whether a person should recuse himself or herself from the ecclesiastical trial court. This is actually part of the problem that occurred at the provincial level between the Archbishop and the provincial tribunal, which is kind of like the Supreme Court of the province. So with that in mind, looking at this closely, we determined that we would propose a standard for recusal for members of the ecclesiastical trial court. So what we're doing is we're taking the current canon, adding a standard of recusal, so it becomes another section. So you basically renumber the first paragraph as now subsection A. We add a subsection B, which is in red, members shall recuse themselves if recusal would be required for a federal judge under, this is 28 U.S.C. section 455. It's part of the United States Code, Law Code. Except that recusal is automatically required if the member belongs to the same church as any party in the trial. If a member meets the criteria for recusal but refuses to recuse him or herself, then a simple majority of the whole court may remove that member from the case. Again, the rationale there is that there needs to be a standard for recusal. This is one of the problems at the provincial level in the dispute between the Archbishop and the provincial tribunal. And we are actually ahead of the province if we adopt this standard for recusal. It comes from the U.S. federal judge standards for recusal, and there are reasons why it's explained there. It makes sense. Anybody who's a lawyer would be familiar with this. It would be easy to adjudicate any questions related to it because of that. And so we just simply refer to that rather than to come up with a new standard of recusal. The whole standard is there as an addendum. It's not going to become part of the Constitution and canons, only this section which provides a standard. But for reference purposes, we've included USC 28 USC Section 455. So that's what we're doing, proposing there.
Do we have any questions for Greg? I would now ask the Synod to vote on this amendment. All in favor of the adoption of the amendment, say aye. Aye. Opposed? So moved. So
Thank
carried.
you.
Thank you, Greg.
Thanks, sir.
Greg, I'm so grateful for you, a very precise man, and I sped you along. I'm sorry to have to do that. And I'm so grateful for the work that you all have done this year. Thank you. We're going to move to our time of our breakouts. Thankfully, I know we missed the break, but we've only been out of lunch for like an hour. So our breakout sessions are available. If the clergy will stay here with me, we also have Called to Go to college students, the essence of evangelism, extending God's hospitality to internationals in your neighborhood, and is there life after Roe? Those will be in the children's wing. You can head out that way into the atrium and down the hall. They will be clearly marked. We will be back here at 3:30.
I belong anywhere when I don't measure up to much in this life.